Out of light comes darkness in the infinite play of destructivity. What was once whole has now become incomplete, a new decreation of death in life. We want to hold on to the very fabric of living and beauty without realizing that each moment slips away, creating space for something new to emerge. It is this space of emergence which we find how meaning is made through the constructs of destruction. This all might sound a bit dark, and that is the point. Without the serpent there would be no fall, hence no redemption. Necropsychoanalysis does not have room for a savior, not even in the form of the analyst. One could say that it is a process of becoming attuned to dying, that life is miserable and meaningless, a dark cavern with infinite depths. Instead of analysis leading the subject outside of the world of shadows into the daylight of freedom, necropsychoanalysts seem to be co-developers of a deeper tread into darkness, the lightless plunge further into modes of despair. I'm not sure what to make of this, though. On the one hand, hasn't the world seen enough of messiahs? Maybe. However, the principle of developing coping mechanisms is a healthy step when confronted with the evidence that our illusions enslave us to a form of reality which creates modes of destruction. I really appreciated Julie's thoughtfulness and her pushback towards clarity. Julie Reshe is a necropsychoanalyst with a private practice that can be accessed through her website, and the link is in the show notes. She is also professor of philosophy and director of the Institute of Psychoanalysis at the Global Center for Advanced Studies. Preston Price wrote this intro, and he and I had a talk to Julie a while back, and it was interesting. She is an interesting figure, an interesting thinker, so I hope that you will enjoy it. Before we get going, I just want to mention that on Saturday, the 10th of November, Jeffrey Robbins, you know him, he's a good friend of the podcast, he will be attending the Gestrift Festival. That's my way of trying to pronounce a Dutch word. This festival is in Utrecht, and Jeff will be there, and he will deliver 2 different lectures on the following topics. Number 1, on not waiting for God, a political theology for our desperate times. Number 2, I believe in change, the good news of radical theology. So there will be some gospel there, at least in the form of lectures. Good news for everyone. And I can say maybe 18 months ago, something like that, Barry Taylor and I went to Utrecht to speak on radical theology. And it's a beautiful city. So if you are close by, try to make it. You can find information in English on the homepage. I'll link to it in the show notes. So that you can check it out. Talking about Barry Taylor, Barry and I have created a new network. It's called European Radical Theology Network, and so far it's just a Facebook group, but the idea is much bigger. So I hope that you'll join the Facebook group to have a conversation about what it would mean to have such a network in place in Europe, and what would we like to accomplish together? Something like that. And so there's a few discussions going on at the moment. And if you're not already there, I think you should join in, especially, of course, if you're from Europe. Hopefully, I'm not sure about this yet, but hopefully we'll have a gathering in Gothenburg, Sweden, sometime in the end of January, beginning of February next year. And I'll go public with the dates as soon as we've scheduled something. But just so you know, this is something that Barry and I have been talking about for a while, and I'm quite excited about having this at least taken some small steps to get this going. Let's get to the talk. Preston Price and I talked to Julie Reshe. I have no idea how to pronounce it, to be honest.
What I do called necropsychoanalysis. It's a weird name, but such is life.
What's the definition?
The definition, it first appeared as a joke for Russian, more Russian-speaking world, because I was critical, even if I did my PhD in psychoanalysis, I was critical about psychoanalysis because it's not scientific enough. I think it doesn't let itself to be combined with the science. It had this weird relationship with science. So what I started to do is I was criticizing popular psychology, positive psychology, and psychoanalysis, all of this. Because whatever I do, I'm critical about. It's my problem. And then Preston invited me to be director of the Institute of Psychoanalysis. And I thought, well, even if I direct Institute of Psychoanalysis, I can be critical about psychoanalysis, right? We can do that. And the joke was that I was trying to combine psychoanalysis and neurobiology, and there is such thing as neuropsychoanalysis. And people, my Russian-speaking world, those who read me, they started to call me necropsychoanalyst because I like all the creepy stuff and all the obscure stuff, like this weird. So yeah, that's what they called me. And then because of all the jokes, this really was demand, not just to ruin the normal popular psychology, but to suggest something instead, not just trying to ruin psychoanalysis, all the practice, but what you have to offer instead. And I was trying to develop something to offer as not a substitution, but I really start all of my sessions by claiming that normal psychology doesn't work. The promised happiness is like they're just manipulating you because you want to be happy, and they promise that it's possible, but it's not. Well, it is possible because people have different periods of time, and people usually recover from depression, from anxiety. There are even different stages when it becomes normally life easier and happier. And when they start to go to analyst or psychologist, counselor, they start to associate or take antidepressant. They start to associate this normal recovery process with this fact, and they think that so it's easy to prove that it works, but it's also possible to prove that it doesn't work. So necropsychoanalysis will never be better. Generally better. It's not this heaven and life goes as it goes.
Do you think the aim with normal psychology then is to be happy?
No, if you really simplify, make it simpler, what people think, what they want. And it's not happier, maybe just fix things.
What would you say, Julie, is the aim of necroanalysis, and what is the goal or the end, or is there an end result for your style of analysis?
I'm not sure there is the result, because it also, I consider the practice of philosophy. And philosophy has to do with dying, because for Socrates, a practice of philosophy, to be real philosophy, was to practice dying. For me, but for Socrates, it was just dying once at the end to get ready for death. But you live multiple deaths, especially now in the world, whereas we have to transform ourselves many times, and we have this freedom, more or less, to transform ourselves. But somehow we perceive that it should be happy event. We have to be modifiable, transformable, and each of those events supposed to be happy, but they're not happy because freedom is not happiness. It's something contrary, because you have to die all the time. You lose people, you lose yourself, your identity. You don't have this stable cognitive mapping. And there is this illusion that this kind of freedom can be practiced in a, in a within the happiness, but it's impossible. So this is the cost of this freedom. And when you explain people this is the cost, the suffering is the cost of just the cost of this freedom, it's a bit easier that this is okay, that they even if committing suicide is preferable now, it's kind of great experience, I think. And philosophy is you never know what the goal of philosophy is, because you just go deeper into reality, deeper into analysis of what is happening. And if you don't have these illusions anymore about reality, about that everything will be fixed and we'll find our happiness, the total happiness, it's not nice knowledge. The truth doesn't come with happiness. And the less illusions you have, the more unhappy you are. So, and there is no goal, because you don't know what will wait you at the end. Because there is this psychological research that claims that the religious people are happier, and they really are, because so illusions means that you have some constant. For example, you have the parental figure of God. It's always with you, always takes care of you. And at the end, you will not die. You will go to heaven. Of course, you're healthy, emotionally perfect. And to the idea that the understanding that there is no such thing as parental figure, nobody takes care, nobody gives a fuck. This comes with the cost of unhappiness. And also we can't live without illusions, because to live totally without illusions means to commit suicide. So we're supposed to have something to live for. But I think it's all the people can exist in this mode of schizophrenia when they don't believe and believe at the same time. And I think this is optimal, because otherwise you don't exist. It's unbearable. Reality is by definition unbearable. This is why we need illusions, why we need the parental figures, but we can try nonetheless. And the figure of philosopher and necropsychoanalysis, I see as psychologist, I see as someone who tries, at least, who can live and teach to live, or share experience how to live in the state really close to suicide, but still persist in it. Like it's doable.
It seems that the role then of or one of the process by which you are in an analysis is to kind of reconcile yourself to this idea that you want to kind of disidentify yourself with certain illusions that might be propping up a sense of a form of happiness that isn't a real sense of happiness, and coming to a better sense of reality through this identification with those illusions, but yet not lose all your illusions, but becoming aware that those illusions have a particular effect within like how you function in reality in society.
Yeah, and it's usually just support, and you listen like a normal counselor, because all the people are doing it. We are naturally kind of doing it, because depression is a sign that you lost your illusions, that you faced the reality. Someone left you. It means there was a possibility, and it was like you can't comprehend it. You can't believe it. It's unbelievable. It's easier to die than to believe it. And the depression is because they actually believe it and they're trying to escape. And to stay with them in this condition, not helping them to escape like some psychologists do, just stay in them and support them in this pain. Yeah, this. Something like that. So it's a kind of normal practice, but at the same time, a bit different, or radically different.
Is part of your work also to create credible new illusions or worldviews that we can actually believe in?
Yeah, I think not illusions, but we normally create something to make this world bearable. And the function of philosopher, I think, is to point that those are still illusions and they're not perfect. There is no final worldview. And even if I consider myself a communist and building this within GCAS, I think what we do is we build in the communist society. But I'm like this person who is within some ideology, still claim there's something wrong with it. So someone hates you, like you're in hateful position all the time because you never let things be obvious, never let things be like perfect. The person that always question and something like. So this is why there's always this confusion. Who am I? Yeah. And it's question if you can be a communist or socialist if you question this thing in a hardcore way. So I don't know who am I.
Do you find pleasure in that, in being that person?
It is a masochistic pleasure in a way, and I'm trying to figure out the theory of masochism as an emancipatory practice, the non-existence, and the one from the philosophers supposed to be masochist, I think, like me. There is a kind of pleasure, but the pleasure of a masochism, it doesn't mean that you don't feel pain. And it's not a pleasure in pain. It just, Deleuze explained that just you feel pain and you're fine, like you're doing it. And maybe only pleasure is that you're doing it. You persist in this position. And it's, you don't exist, so means kind of you giving yourself to something, to some cause, or so you don't have your own interest. And I think it's not a philosopher. I think Freud was wrong, that what human being wants is pleasure, the first goal. I think it's more, and he was right in his guess that I think that we have this masochistic tendencies from birth. There is something in us, this self-destructive, and this self-destructive is not supposed to be cured. Because there is a perspective, there is a possible perspective that this is the best and this is the emancipation.
But I'm thinking, because if you're the submissive partner in such a relationship that you describe, supposedly you're in control, or it might offer you a sense of control because, if you go to BDSM, you have safe words and such in order to make the one who is submissive actually controlling the situation. I can end this. I can stop this pain. And perhaps that has something to do with stepping into such roles as you describe yours, and say that I can feel pleasure in this situation, although I am criticized for being the one who's always pointing out what's wrong with the ideology.
So we're gonna have class about BDSM and love as political concepts. I'll try to connect political domination, submission with the practical within the sexual sphere, but I don't think it's sexual because I'm criticizing the idea of pansexualism, that all the bodily practices, the practices of proximity we reduce to sexuality, especially BDSM practices, because it doesn't have to do that much with sex, as even sex doesn't have to do that much with sex, the way we interpret it usually. And there is emancipatory potential in the position of masochism, because if you see from even outside of those frame of normal, like today's practice of masochism, where you have limits and stop words, all of those, still in a like total masochism practice without limits, there is emancipatory practice, and for Deleuze it was it possesses the greater power than those who dominate, because there is the dialectics of domination and submission, and the power is something that is practiced on a contrast or against some and on a body of submissive position and masochistic position, as that you illuminate yourself, you don't exist, so there is no, or you follow the rule, and the rule at the bottom of they're contradictory, and they only aim to regulate something that doesn't obey the rules. So this is a position of to break free, not and you break the cycle of the dialectic of submission and domination. You don't go into position of domination and just stop on a submission, even if you die at the end. It was freedom.
So can you define freedom?
Yeah. Freedom is a good question. I mean, people wrote books about it.
I'm thinking in the context where you talk about it, because I mean, Deleuze has a kind of Bergsonian understanding about freedom. It's the freedom to create your own concepts, not to be territorialized completely in your way of reasoning, so that whatever you come up with philosophically or ideologically is a reaction to questions posed by other people.
But also, for me, there is no such thing as your own question or your own ideas, because this common sense is the only sense we have. So some ideas that we share, and it's illusion that there is individual who creates his or her own ideas, because it's always a repetition of a common sense, always a dialogue with society, because every word that you learned is a word you inherited from society. And same with ideas, there are no unique ideas. And the individuality comes as this destructive deviation from the common sense, from the repetition that more or less coincides, the transformation. And what the freedom in this situation can't mean that it's only your ideas. And what you feel as your ideas is not your ideas as well.
Of course. Is freedom something personal?
And if there is such thing as personal, because the human being starts with a body of the mother of the other human being, and it desperately needs the body of the mother. But for me, the essence of BDSM, both masochism and sadism is in this childhood situation of non-existent, of desire not to exist, to disappear in the body of mother, like children are crying for mother to dominate them by breastfeeding them, penetrating them, by the way, and in this situation, you don't know who is dominating. Either mother is dominating or child is dominating because it's crying to keep its killing sound, and it wants your body to dominate your body to be fed. So in this situation of there is more or less ideal, it's closer to ideal of non-existence as existence within the social body. And maybe this is a freedom, the non-existent, the being part of society. But at the same time, with the deviation, there are no final answers. Maybe freedom is kind of a weird coincidence of non-existence and the deviation of this common sense, if it's possible. But it's hard to think this position, but it's something.
I think there's a mutuality or a liberatory principle within the mutuality of what you're talking about, and the relationship of this dialectic between non-existence and existence. The kind of so you're talking about how the mother dominates the child but the child also dominates the mother, because the mother is dominating the child in the sense that she is presenting her body and penetrating the body of the child. But at the same time, the child is the one calling forth the mother, and so taking the mother away from other aspects of her life that she like to engage in that doesn't revolve around the child. But at the same time, there's a mutuality between the two, because they're both being dominant and submissive at the same time, in the same relationship to each other in the same event. So I think there's something there's a principle of liberation in that sense, in the mutuality between the two, because there's a shared aspect of reality between both going on at the same time. So in the sense that, like you were just saying, it never really ends. There's no finality to it, which also it's something you mentioned about there's no really finality to analysis and necroanalysis. There's no real like end goal, right? There's no result. There's no like, okay, now you're done and you've completed the course and you can move on now. The same thing goes with this kind of the structure of BDSM and the process as well. And I think that has implications for society, and this concept of that we're talking about in terms of freedom, or maybe imagining better social worlds. There is no final social world, but there might be better ones and better illusions in the meantime.
Yeah, it's true about mutuality. It's true, but at the same time, it's totally contrary to that, because individuality for a child to become grown up and to like develop into growing up and one who has responsibility, she or he is supposed to go through the trauma of delineation from the parents, so they don't serve him or her, do whatever he or she wants. And this is traumatic. It's necessary. Growing up is necessary traumatic experience. And today, we, at the same time, we stay children because we all that transformative. We don't have our roots. And at the same time, we are more growing up. Like this process of changing, of staying of child who is getting mature. And it is necessary traumatic. It can't be not traumatic. So this deviation from society, because your own idea, it can't be your own idea, but it can be radical deviation. It goes with traumaticity of separation from your roots, from your family, from someone serving you. And it hurts. So it's traumatic. So, and it is kind of a freedom in this as well. Not only in coherence with thinking of other people, but be contrary on in some ideas, to deviate some ideas. The word I like is to pervert, because perversion, now we use it in a sexual context, but initially it meant that someone interprets the dogmas, the religion dogmas, in the wrong way. So use something in an inappropriate way. And the deviation, so you have a dogma, but you pervert them. And this is the only freedom I think possible, the freedom of deviation. And of course, you are hateful in this. And the being hateful, it means that you are different. You differ from, and it's painful. So freedom is in this as well.
Sounds like freedom. There's more freedom in heresy than in orthodoxy.
Yeah.
To use theological terms, I suppose. Yeah. No, that's important, I think. But I'm just trying to wrap my head around this idea of necessary traumas in terms of maybe politics. I know we're talking about like interpersonal relationships and individuality, but in terms of imagining a social world, what kind of social traumas are necessary for like a society to go through, maybe in this maturation process or this individuation process on this, analogously speaking?
I prefer to think about child first, because this experienced this more, and then project it to society. Because in relationship, the perfect relationship, the most natural relationship of mother or parent and a child, that is the most constant, because you're supposed to take care of the child, you're responsible. So maybe in our days is just the only example of a constant relationship. But even those relationships, the childhood can be not traumatic, because child grows up and mother not supposed to, for the child to grow up, it means mother doesn't, or father, whatever, doesn't satisfy all the needs. And this comes with trauma, you know. And if you will not feed the child, for example, and it will just not eat, yeah, it will, she or he. I mean, to be a parent is to be to a certain, to dominate, to at the same time to be masochistic, because the child dominates you. So all this, even the we can see, even
perhaps you can hear me dominating my children by just closing the door and not allowing them to step into the room.
Yeah. By the way, they adjust the sound of when they cry for the brain of their parents, specific parents, to hear it more, so they will get a response for sure. So they're really killing you. Yeah, that's the one who you'll love the more, that you're supposed to sacrifice your life for this. Like, and so it comes from, it's inevitable. You can't get rid of it. This is the sense. And I know that all the people I was working at, they're not parents. They want to be this perfect parents that, I don't know, are not dominating. But it's impossible. The child will die, you know, if you will not teach them to cross the road. And you just can't to cross the road properly. It's impossible just to say, cross the road properly. No, if you don't show the emotional, how important it is, and it will not cross the road properly, never. So there is this to educate the child, and it's your responsibility to do it. You have to turn in a disgusting sometimes person. And for children to grow up, not supposed to satisfy all of those needs, and this comes with the trauma for them. They have a reason to hate you. Once and it's all through all your life. Once you stop getting what you were getting, you feel that you still feel that you're supposed to get it, and you hate someone who doesn't give you that. But this is the maturation, and you have a right to hate someone, like government maybe they're not giving you something, but why they should give you this? And it at the same time, this trauma that you're not getting, the lack of parental figure, it's freedom with this comes, and there is the joy of freedom, kind of. masochistic.
You have to balance, because if you don't step in and dominate, you cause problems for the children. But you can also be too invasive and completely take over. I mean, I work with teenagers between 14 and 18, 19, who are abusing drugs or who are involved in criminality.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can see in quite a few of them have issues that stems from primarily invasive mothers, and I think it's anecdotal, but with an absent father and mothers who try to overcompensate to be everything. But I have cases with fathers doing the same thing, but it's something I've seen, at least in my work. It's been more the mothers who are invasive, trying to control everything, doing everything, for treating 14-year-olds like 3-year-olds. Not allowing them to develop as a person distinct from the mother.
I think it's a common trend now to treat the children the way that we want, because there is this illusion that childhood can be untraumatizing, and it's possible for parents, means it's possible for mother or for parents to act in a way that it will not traumatize the child. It's with satisfied need of the children, like trying to satisfy all their needs, and they don't get mature in the way. And it doesn't mean that it means that later in life, the life will be more traumatizing for them, because it's like they'll have to find out all at once that nobody will satisfy your need.
You have to be able to differentiate yourself in order to grow as a person. The lack of responsibility that follows makes you a non-contributor to a larger network of people, say your tribe or your society. Being someone who are not allowed to, or someone who is incapable of contributing, makes you unfree, I think. It will also makes you feel sense of uselessness, perhaps, or, be other people depending on your contribution is very important for us to function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
No, and I think that's important because, I'm bringing it up to more of a broader level beyond the individual to the social or the political. When you have a state or, let's just say a state or society or a tribe that is too influential or too interventionist in your growth, you're also not going to learn how to defend yourself or to mature in this process. But in the same way, if you have a state that is not really helpful in garnering or creating those networks that create stability, you're also going to have difficulty in forming any kind of social cohesion among each other. So I'm not trying to say that like the state has to be this other that does everything for you, or that sets but it should be at least the state should be setting parameters, and you should be able to participate in that state as well, I suppose.
Yeah, and even the idea of a state, we still perceive it as a parental figure. And my idea is, especially with GCAS, to an institution, especially educational institution, we still perceive them as a parental figure, and we treat them in this way because this movement against them, that they're supposed to give us something that they don't give, or government. And I think we're supposed to develop some kind of other attitude, that it is us, first of all. And this attitude can change a lot. The very attitude to government, to institution, not as to parental figures. And, it might be wrong in a way, of course, but at the same time, it might be right.
So, but you said you're a communist. What does communism mean then? Because I think communism at least risks ending up in that kind of situation where you're completely dependent on state as a mother.
Yeah, and for me, I have different interpretation, and this is something I'm really criticizing. So I'm not sure I can perceive myself as a communist, because I like the idea of community. Yeah, of community of people that are responsible, and that from this, not the bottom initiative, because bottom presupposes that there is something opposite. But if it's possible, the community to the self-government to some extent of the community. And without the parental figure, either we're trying to fight it or we're okay with it. It's still something that governs us. It's still opposite to the horizontal level of communications with other, of relationships with other. And the idea of all the left, it's the terrible pro-Christian idea that there's going to be the final revolution with everything will fall into place. It's like heaven will come to earth. It's terrible. And I think it's why left ideas are so popular now, is because this promise, the substitution of this illusion, the Christian illusion, that there'll be happiness, the total happiness at the end. It's possible, and we can do something just by feeling angry and by believing in this. We can do it somehow, or maybe step by step we can do it. But it's here and now, and we'll never do it. And there is only people left. Yeah, we only have each other. There is no God. There is no outside philosopher who will develop the idea for us how to set this final revolution and overcome capitalism. There is a capitalism. There's nothing you can do. You know, and here us suffering people, and this it's something that connects. So we are already connected somehow, because we are even trying to embody this illusion. This is what connects it, and this is cool thing about the illusion, because it forms the community of people. Like something about church, which is cool. It's not God. Yeah. It's that we have the community of people who come together to discuss God, because they have this idea and something to discuss. And I think that in our age, this Negri's idea that the media, the social media, the internet, or is something, the substitution of this illusion of God, because it's interconnectivity. I think that the main human need is sociality, like to be social, to be with some, not to be excluded. At the same time, I don't think we have to satisfy it, because not to satisfy it will never be individuality and responsible people. But to satisfy this need to some extent, this is what, for example, Facebook gives us. Like, I don't know you guys, and I'm talking with you, and it's really nice. This is because we are all connected, like in some metaphysical, even the hyper level. And it was impossible before. So we had the God and religion and these people discussing God in church every Sunday. And now we don't need it. We can talk, and we have some more topics to talk about. And we are more immediately connected with each other all over the world. So this is a better illusion. And this satisfies this basic social need. So it works well. It's already, the revolution happened with this media, with internet. It already happened, I think, and maybe think so. And this is no such thing as will overcome a capitalism and people will live in harmony and there's going to be love with no hate. It's impossible.
I mean, that is a kind of escapism to talk about, the final revolution and then eternal peace. That's dying. I think, if the final peace would be nuclear war and everyone dies. Okay, final peace, true democracy, everyone dies.
So it is possible.
It doesn't matter how much money you have. Doesn't matter how much power you have. If we all die at the same time, democracy. Deleuze talks about, the revolutionary placing himself or herself, in the middle or in the gap between social totality on the one side and technological development on the other. And in that gap, inscribing his dream of a permanent revolution. You need to always think about the world or your society or even your idea of God, perhaps, then, if that's still a thing, as plastic. So that it can always reform and transform, and we can always move ahead without a final goal. Because if you step over into a totalitarian idea, it's always going to be oppressive. It's always going to end the possibility of revolution or cause people to just want to throw the whole level of the strata into suicidal collapse. And I think that's much what's going on now, with people looking at the way the world is organized, and particular leaders are standing as symbols, I guess, for how people experience this totality with Trump and Putin and whoever. You just want to throw everything into suicidal collapse because that would be peaceful, as I said, if we all die. They're willing to throw everything overboard. But if you don't keep parts of the organization that's already in place, like capitalism, as you're talking about, if you don't understand this is not something that we can attack from the outside, but we actually need some of it in order to attack itself. Like you talk also about, Julie, with, I'm not sure I'm a communist, but I'm part of it and I'm critical towards it. So you keep some of it and you use it to criticize perhaps the ideas that are put forth by other communists. That's how you can move forward. Sorry for rambling.
No, I thought the rambling was good, especially like the part about democracy.
Yeah.
It seems to me there's kind of a duality here, or a dialectic between like destructive creation and creative destruction. I see that like this idea of overturning the systems from the outside would be a destructive creation because you are creating something new, but it's totally destroying everything that's already there, right? Like you're saying, Joseph. But also there's a creative destruction in the sense of this sense that when you're working within the materials that you already are provided with to create something new out of it, you're destroying you're destroying in a more creative way. You're kind of creating something new with no maybe end goal in mind, like we've discussed, but you're still creating new processes, new socialities, new ways to relate to each other. So I think that's really interesting in terms of like how we think about interacting in the world. We don't have to have like this final eschatological moment where God comes down from the heavens and the New Jerusalem is established on earth, but instead we have to look at how we interact with each other in the middle of things every day, and how our interactions with each other can be, in that sense, liberatory.
Yeah, I agree. But what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to explain something, describe something without using the concept of creation at all. So what is left is only destruction. And I like the Malibu idea about destructive plasticity. But for her, this group of people, and what I'm trying to do, the general principle of plasticity or modification is destructive. Because if we talk about creation, we presuppose some outside, even the human was individual, because for Deleuze, for example, individual is the agent of God. It's not enough to destroy God. We have to destroy the human being as a creator, because this is what God was created as an image of. So truly materialistic perspective for me is to think everything through destruction that doesn't destroy. And because there is no material from outside, something new, like radically new, it's impossible because it presupposes some magic, some magical element, some order, some goal. But there is in evolution, there is no such thing as the outside. You have the material, and what is new, the new species, the new features of species, and in your brain, the new ideas, new formation, the new synapses. It's not forming through the appearance of the new synapses. It's always come with the destruction. So it's the modification of something. It's already this perversion, the tweaking, or querying, something like this. But it's a more destructive process than creative. And this the idea of opposition, that even Hegelian dialectics of like normal thinking, that's this. And even Malibu thinking that there is this destructive process and that is overcome into generative process. I don't like it. I want to think about it without the overcoming, going somewhere beyond and overcoming into generative, because if you think about it, there is not this degeneration that comes out after destruction. Like everything is in destruction, but this destruction is something that is not. It's not like total dissolution. It's the life that is death, but it's constrained with a constraint that doesn't let to dissolve totally. And so there is no good and bad thing. It just
I mean, that makes sense to me. And I guess maybe to clarify what I meant by creation, I don't mean creation ex nihilo, like the God who creates absolutely everything out of absolutely nothing. I like Catherine Keller's work more she talks about creation out of profundity. She's more of a process theologian. So she doesn't see God as like this kind of transcendent being that can create absolutely everything out of a void, right? She sees God and creation as being more of a process, like you're saying, where things are destroyed. It's more destruction, but there's something new being generated out of it, not from the outside, not something that's absolute from nothing that existed before, but something from within, a more materialistic perspective of creation. But I do like this idea of destructive plasticity and your reference of Malibu too. I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, I have troubles myself not using the concept of creation or generation. It's like really hard, but I'm trying. It's just the experiment of thinking if it's possible to do.
Yeah, because I think that I haven't read much of Malibu's work, and I'm really only familiar with her work through like Clayton Crockett and Jeff Robbins, and they reference like her three notions of plasticity, which is I'll probably get them all wrong, but I know that one of them is something that this plastic can take form. Something that's plastic can also give form. There's something that it has a resistance to it, but it's explosive, right? So there's like these three notions where they look at materiality as being something that's more plastic. It's something, but I'm wondering if maybe your notion of destruction would be more in line with her third notion of plasticity, which is like this more explosive notion, or how would you understand her notions of plasticity?
Well, it's not her classification of types of plasticity. It's normally accepted, and I don't like it in neurobiology. And she criticizes as well, but she doesn't go far enough in her criticism, because the normal types of plasticity of the child, developmental plasticity, then plasticity that has to do with environment, with influence of environment, and then they add the third one, a type of plasticity, destructive plasticity, and the group of people, those who suffer from destructive plasticity, are those who have different kind of brain lesions and suffer, for example, from Alzheimer. So when something went wrong, and in neurobiology they don't pay much attention to it, because they just they usually describe this, and the final stage of this description of destructive plasticity is how to heal it. So they don't see it as a self-sufficient phenomena. And one of the types of people who are suffer from the work of destructive plasticity are those who have post-traumatic stress disorder. So it has to do with traumas. And for me, all the plasticity is destructive, especially the childhood plasticity, which for Malibu is the opposite to destructive plasticity. Like child, it develops in the perfect image of a child who develops is without traumas. But every new knowledge, every new experience comes in a cost of trauma, because something new, for Freud, the definition of trauma is that there is new knowledge, new experience that cannot form the coherent whole with the already existing experience. But every new, by definition, because it's new, it can't form the coherent form, because it doesn't repeat exactly the formed knowledge. So it is a trauma. The knowledge, and especially if I learn math, like it's really traumatic. Like you would cry, yeah. And all the new knowledge is traumatic knowledge. All the new experience about reality, it's highly traumatic. And even on the level of biological processes, we see the neurobiologists knows about it, they talk about it, but they tend to see destructive processes as secondary. But the thing is that if you eliminate the destructive processes, there are going to be no those generative processes, and we shouldn't even distinguish. Like, for example, the formation of new neurons, the neurogenesis comes always with apoptosis. That is the self-suicide of cells, and it's more active in the child. So child is in child brain, so the child has more deaths. Yeah, at the same time, when it's something generative, it has more deaths. It's something closer to death than growing up. And the formation of new synapses and stretching of new synapses, they go together with synaptic pruning and with depression of synapses. And if you take away one of the processes, the destructive process, the other process will be like we think normally that if you will be like superhumans, but it's not, it will just stop functioning. So the question is if we can even distinguish think them as opposites. Maybe it's the same process and it's more destructive because there's like no additional material to form. It's just recombination and it's destruction. And this is the process, the developmental plasticity and the childhood plasticity. Both of those plasticities can be explained through the destructive plasticity.
Would you say that then, just briefly, that novelty, and I might be using a word that might not fit here, but novelty is preceded by destruction then?
Yeah.
Like new processes, new formations, new manifestations are preceded then by destructive mechanisms than by maybe creative regenerative mechanisms.
Yes, because even if on the level of like social changes, it means that destructiveness means that you always keep something old. There is nothing new, like new material, new ideas, completely new outside of the present order. You preserve the old, just you tweak it, you repeat it with a destruction, introducing this perversion, and you never know which one. And it always happened by itself, not that people do. It's just the process, the tradition changed, the ideas change, and you never know. The revolution is possible, but you only know retrospectively what of those perversions were influential enough. It's same like in evolution. The material for evolution is mutation. Genes, they go through the process of mutation, and this mutation tweaking, this destructive process is the error in the reproduction of gene, is the material of some new features to emerge. And this is destructive processes because mutation is a potential, can cause death, because it means that organisms that adapted to certain environment starts to be disadapted to this environment. So it's destructive, but at the same time, there is no other material for change, and you never know which mutation will persist, which mutation will change something, will change the feature of a species, or will even create a new species. So you only know it retroactively, and depends on environment, not that much of if it was a good mutation or bad mutation. There is no such thing. So they are destructive, and the same with the cultural revolution. It's not totally something new; it's just deviation, and you don't know which deviation will work out like it's like something important.
So, is there any final things you want to leave us with, Julie?
No. Do
Okay.
you have anything?
No, and that was really interesting.
Thank you. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for listening. I hope you found that interesting. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to thecatacombicmachine.com and click the link for support, and you'll come to a Patreon page. I would really appreciate that. And just, if you're there, if you're at the homepage, check out the articles. There's nothing really new, but if you haven't read up on the latest stuff and so on, check it out, because there's some interesting articles published on the homepage. Other than that, I hope that you will have a good week and take care. Let's talk soon.